morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV Sports Edition. On this show, we bring you talk about global affairs, innovation, and increasingly turbulent world politically and economically. And on the heels of Major League Cricket here in Morrisville, where I greet you live, the All-America city of Morrisville in North Carolina, the eighth largest state in the United States, we hosted the Major League Cricket Championships, which was quite amazing. And to see the transformation of a multi-purpose park become a stage for Major League Cricket, a sport that is being brought by immigrants from all around the world. As I closed out the ceremonies yesterday, I was actually at City Hall, but the day before, I reminded everybody that, immigrants bring these great ideas, and cricket was popular after the Civil War and waned down in popularity, baseball taking over. But it was people like from India and other nations who brought this great sport to the United States. And now major investments are being made into cricket in the US, pulling in talent from around the world and investing in cities like Dallas, Texas, where the finals will be played. But there's large amounts of cricket players and enthusiasts. More to come on that as we continue to follow the rebirth and growth of cricket. Meanwhile, before we bring in a special guest, just want a reminder that the Ukraine counteroffensive is entering its eighth week. It has worked well in terms of liberating more territory than Russia captured during the months-long winter offensive, but it's taken a little longer than folks had hoped. But it does seem to be working. So we'll be talking about Ukraine-Russia war. The Fed is looking to raise rates one last time to fight inflation. Inflation is coming down. Facebook Meta reported a higher quarter earnings than normal, which is good. And there was a House hearing on UFOs. They call them ufologists. Everything looking at Department of Defense, and between 2007 and 2012 funded a small program to investigate UFA reports. And that's really about it. I mean, we're going to go ahead and get charged up for a great show. We are excited to have a special guest. I know I probably left out some other world news, but we will bring that up. And the final thing, I talked about the Fed, and the federal judge in America struck down an immigration policy that prohibits asylum seekers from entering the country unless they have an appointment at a port of entry. So we'll continue our discussion of immigration. I'm going to go ahead and get started now with Mark Lee bringing on a guest. Mark, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Yeah, glad to do that. We've got an amazing guest. It actually comes from the world of sports management. It is going to a city that you love dearly and all in that space. Well, actually, they're in that city. They're actually in D.C. at George Washington University. And I know that you are a big fan of that area, and we'll be heading back to that area. But Lisa Delpy, Nerati is definitely, and I'll get the pronunciation when she comes up, and all along those lines, is a fascinating lady that has done a lot of work in the space of sports management, and definitely even does some training in that level as well. And we do know that the World Cup is going on. You just earlier mentioned the whole notion of cricket and how that is developing here in this area. I know that there is a skate park that is definitely nationally and even internationally known here in North Carolina as well. It's one of those BMX parks, and it was actually done by Mr. Dyer, I believe is how he pronounces the last name, because he is one of those stars in that space, and that is in the town of Holly Springs. And definitely there are some world-class soccer facilities here as well. And I do know that one of the things that Ms. Derati talks about is the power of sports to unify us and all along those lines. So definitely just would love to learn a little bit more, and I'm sure our audience would as well, more about your background. I do know that the Women's World Cup is going on. They're down there in Australia and New Zealand competing and all in that space. And I know that you've had some experience working with the World Cup. When I looked at your resume, I was going like, wow, this woman has worked for the World Cup, the Olympics, and a number of other great organizations and all in that space, and is doing a lot of great things in the way of sports management and even sports tourism, because we know that sports tourism can draw a lot to a city. You heard definitely Steve earlier mentioning how cricket is impacting Morrisville, the town that is over here in North Carolina. I know we get a lot of money in Durham from the Durham Bulls as well, which is our minor league team, as well as the folks that are coming to watch the great teams over there at Duke and UNC, which is nearby and all in that space. So I'd love, and I'm sure our audience would love to hear more about sports management, sports tourism, and how you got into this field.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, I've been a professor at GW for 33 years now, and I've had the opportunity to attend 21 consecutive Olympic Games. Paris will be 22, as well as 6 World Cups. Unfortunately, I'm not in Australia or New Zealand right now, but I'm following it closely. And want to say that it is the largest by far of any World Cup since it started in 1991. We need to understand that men's World Cup started in 1930. So they have a extensive history compared to the women's World Cup. But this is the first time that it's being held in 2 countries who represent 2 different continental federations. We've increased the team number from 24 to 32 teams. The prize money has tripled, but we have to also understand that we've increased the number of teams. This is the first time that they've just divided up the money in terms of broadcast and sponsorship. Traditionally, FIFA has sold kind of just added on the Women's World Cup to the men's. So different sponsors and different broadcast rights holders would buy the rights to the men and get the women's added on. But this time they are selling them separately. And we can discuss that because the timing of the matches in Australia and New Zealand are not so great for the US and European markets, which pay the largest rights fees. So it's a kind of difficult World Cup to start this selling of the rights separately, but they're doing great right now. There's room for improvement, but it'll take time. And I'll stop there and share more.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I was curious about was what drew you into sports management? Were you an athlete yourself, or was this something that you always wanted to do? I know I have a second cousin, my cousin's daughter, that is in doing some work at UNC as part of their training department and doing a lot of work in that space. She just actually started that job. I think she had worked at either Louisville or Kentucky in the past and all in that kind of way. But I was wondering what drew you into it, and was it an interest that you always had, and whether you participated in sports yourself?
I was a competitive swimmer all my life and decided to stop that in college. I knew I was not going to make the Olympic team, but I had a passion for the Olympic Games. So I did an internship at the U.S. Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs in 1983. And at that time, there were 3 interns. Now they have like 100 interns. But my role was specifically in the exercise science physiology lab. But I also had some responsibilities of taking VIPs and sponsors around the complex because they had just took over this Army base and made it into a training center. And I realized that I like being out of the lab more than in the lab and learning more about the business side of sports. And so that's really what launched my career in the sports business side. I also had, they invited me over to Sarajevo, and that was my first Olympic Games in 1984 winter. And then I'm from San Diego originally, so I volunteered in the 84 Summer Games. And I like to share this anecdote, is that in 84, I was a hostess to the IOC. That's actually what they called us. And unfortunately, that's some of the individuals actually thought we were hostesses. So there's been lots of changes over the years that I've been involved in sports.
Well, it sounds like there was a major individual from Durham that was also involved with the Olympics and all in that space. I know that family members of mine were friends of his, but I was wondering if you ever had the pleasure of working with Dr. Leroy Walker, because I do know that he was a major person in the Olympic movement. I was just wondering your experiences in working with him, if you had that opportunity.
I'm so glad you brought his name up. He was actually one of my mentors. I had some fabulous mentors in the Olympic movement, and Leroy was right there.
Yeah, he was definitely an amazing person. Glad that you had the pleasure of working with him. Before we get to the deal with Saudi Arabia, I definitely going to bring in some of the other panelists as well, and all in that space. One of the conversations that comes up in entertainment, and I think in sports as well, is a number of the folks that get involved are very much aware of the star part of the business and everything. That's why you hear the term show business, and I would argue it is a sports business as well. I'm not sure all the time that those that are involved in the athletics, whether it is on the swimming level or the football level, and I use those two sports because they contrast very vastly in terms of their popularity and in terms of their public view, and how many people actually see them and all in that space, and how many people actually know the business side. So I just wonder your take as one that teaches this. Do you feel that enough of our athletes are learning the management side of the business? Because it is a sports business, but I know a lot of athletes are wanting the star quality of what is going on.
Well, athletes, collegiate athletes, I'll start with collegiate athletes right now. They are getting a fast lesson in the business of sports with name, image, likeness, allowing them to make money off of their name, image, likeness. So many of them are venturing into business deals as such. Whether it's, they tweet out a promotion and they get a residual from each purchase from their link, or doing endorsement deals. All of these, the athletes, student athletes, are having to learn not only about contracts and responsibilities, but about taxes, because now they have to pay taxes on all of that. So, but many athletes are in our sports management program. We have both an undergraduate business program in sports management and a master's program. And so we have a number of athletes that are studying the business side of sports. In fact, I start out my class in sports marketing is how do you spell sport? And it's not SPORT, it's MONEY. So I think everyone needs to understand that, you have a product, which is, the 5 basketball players or, the players on the field, but everything else around it is business.
No, definitely. One of the business things that I was always curious about, and you mentioned the Olympics earlier. I know that it'll happen in the World Cups as well, as oftentimes there are this massive buildup that happens, and there's a lot of facilities that are built for those events. I know that we had the like the summer games, or kind of one of those games even here in the Triangle. A number of things were built. Some of them are still in use, but some of them are now in disuse. And I know that happened in California and some of the other places. I was just wondering your take on whether we're utilizing enough of the Olympic spaces after the Olympics are gone, because that is something that just I'm always curious about. I know that I have family members that have been in city planning and stuff like that, and I sometimes wonder if we are maximizing the use of the facilities after the games are gone.
Well, actually, in the United States, almost all of the facilities have been utilized to their maximum. Right now, over 50% of our Olympic winter athletes have trained and used the Salt Lake 2002 winter facilities. So, and Los Angeles, I think all of those facilities continue to be in use. I think the velodrome was discontinued, but the swimming pool is still there, the track, etc. So other countries that are not such a sport country as we are in the United States, with all of our youth sports, collegiate sports, professional sports, they have a more difficult time leveraging all of their facilities. And, what the IOC is doing now is having conversations with any country or city that's interested in hosting future games, and asking them, how will these facilities and hosting the games fit into your 30-year strategic plan for that city? So they're really trying to dig down and not just have them bid for the publicity and for that exposure, but think long-term, because even though the cities make decisions, like for the World Cup in Brazil, FIFA kept telling them, look, only do 8 stadiums, the minimum 8 stadiums. But what did they do? They built 12, because they couldn't figure out which cities politically did they want to not build a stadium in. So, but who got blamed? FIFA. Oh, FIFA made them build 12. No, FIFA did not. FIFA was trying to tell them 8 only. Now we have an unused facility in Manaus in the middle of the jungle, another facility in Brasilia that's been turned into like a shopping center. So it's not always the sports organizations, but it's the politics of the city that's hosting or the country that's hosting that makes these poor decisions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The other thing I was curious about was I mentioned it earlier that I definitely want to get to the golf deal as well, and then I'm gonna bring in my fellow panelists. But I mentioned earlier about tourism and how it can drive, particularly sports tourism, business around the United States and even around the world. And actually, that even may play into a little bit of what Saudi Arabia is doing as well with the PGA. But if you could talk a little bit about the importance of sports tourism, I know that there's even sports tourism agency or commission or something like that that's right here in our city of Durham, North Carolina, that tries to draw some sports events here. And I know other places have that as well. But I'd love to hear your thoughts around the importance of sports to the overall economy.
Right. No, sports is a huge driver in tourism, and it's either people traveling to play sports, so it could be on the recreation side, playing, for whether they're playing golf or they're scuba diving or skiing. So that's one aspect of sports tourism. The other side is traveling to play sports, whether it's at the grassroots level or the weekend warriors, traveling to play, participate in CrossFit games or any of that. And then, of course, you have the collegiate and professional traveling to play sports. But then the most important is travel to watch sports. So you have all these parents and grandparents traveling to watch their youth play sports, or you have, fans traveling to watch collegiate or professional sports. And then you have the mega events of the World Cup and the Olympic Games and, Final Fours, Super Bowls, etc. I'm excited to say that in Australia and New Zealand, it's the largest audience for a women's event ever. They've sold over 1.4 million tickets. And, this is a great feat, and it's only going to get better for women's sports.
Yeah, I had the pleasure this past Monday, so about 2 days ago, of actually having at one of my jobs, which is a cultural arts center, I work at the recreation department, which is actually the recreation people that are in charge of recreation at Duke University, doing a all-day retreat. So it was interesting learning the things that they have that are not always known. Like I didn't know that they had a rock climbing wall and a rafting center and a number of other things. And when I talked to a friend of mine in the recreation space, they told me that, yeah, they have a lot of state-of-the-art equipment. And I'm sure y'all have that at George Washington as well. So a lot of the colleges, and sometimes they even provide it to the overall public as well, not just the college and administration that are all over there. And that was something that I was not aware of. But do y'all have that same kind of facilities that are state of the art over there at George Washington?
Yes. And, speaking of new sports like rock climbing, break dancing, BMX, all of these new sports that are in the Olympic Games are also driving more competitions. So cities from around the world are hosting these competitions. The other thing that I want to say is the economic impact is most felt in second and third tier cities, because they have the space to build these multi-field complexes. Some of them in Iowa and Kansas have, 20 fields, and people travel from all over to compete at the youth level. I always say, if you hold like 10 major youth tournaments, it's about the same economic impact as a Super Bowl, because with the Super Bowl, you have to spend money on security and VIP hosting and all of that. So with youth sports, you don't have any of that. You just have pure economic impact. Yep. Heads and beds, we call it, food in bellies, and gas in tanks. So parents spend a lot of money on youth sports.
No, no doubt about it. The other thing that we said we're going to talk about, and like I said, I'm definitely going to bring Steve. He's on one of those areas, and definitely Jacoby might have some thoughts as well because he's in the gaming lane, and Lee Newton Rhodes as well. And definitely, like somebody told you earlier, Lee Newton Rhodes is running for president. Jacoby actually runs an esports center, and all along those lines. And Sasha Starr is there in Canada, and Shaquille is here. He's from Australia, and all along those lines. So glad that they are here, and they might have some questions as well. But I know one of the things that people have been thinking about is some of these multi-level deals that are going on. And that's one of the things that I know that you have had some thoughts about, even how it can be a driving force of unity and all along those lines. So I'd love to hear some more of your thoughts around the PGA's deal and what is going on there in Saudi Arabia, because that is something that some folks are interested in, have been watching in the sports lanes as well. So that was one of the reasons of inviting you, but I definitely wanted to learn about the sports background, and I'm sure others may have some other questions as well, including Steve telling you about what he's got going on over there in his area, which is Morrisville. But definitely, Lisa, if you can share a little bit about your thoughts around that particular deal.
I think competition makes a better product. It happens in every industry. So when Live started, for whatever reasons they started, it is improving the golf product. And now with this merger, which was going to happen because the PGA, they increased their prize pool to compete, but they cannot survive. It's not sustainable without additional funding. So the PGA needs the additional funding. The PIF has that funding. So, why fight an enemy when you can pull together and make a better product and be a win-win-win situation. So athletes were looking for more money. They were looking for reduced rounds, especially for those that are consistently making tournaments. Fans also want all the best players to play together. They may, depending on how this merger goes, they may go with the shotgun start, which will reduce the time of the matches, which, you see it in Major League Baseball and other sports are trying to shorten the time frame of sports events. Fans have less attention span. TV, looking for shorter times too. So there's a number of positives that can come through this merger.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, real quick. I'll leave it a couple minutes. But one sport that's really getting a lot of attention, we just spoke about cricket. So they're looking at potentially making that an Olympic sport in 2028, but pickleball. And so I was a former All-American tennis player, and I got a lot of flack from some of the players that I played with at a very high level that I was caught on a social media, Facebook Live, playing pickleball, and they go, "Steve, you can't do that. You're a former collegiate tennis player." But but I had fun. I mean, it's a good workout, and they're not even saying that that's becoming a phrase. So would that be? Are you seeing the growth of pickleball in your area, and do you think that could potentially be an Olympic sport as well?
Well, first off, pickleball is my sport. I would normally be playing this time, so I'm addicted.
Yeah,
I'm addicted to it. It's very addicting. I've played many other sports, but this one has caught my attention and it's held my attention. I'm usually a little bit Titus, but
it's
the
fun.
thing is, it's growing. At first it started maybe at retired people or more seniors, but many of my friends have young kids that are going to tournaments all over the United States right now. Just like they go to soccer tournaments, they're going to pickleball tournaments. So yes, it is growing. You see, so many of the people I play with are traveling. It's a reason for them to travel. And so you have people who are close to retirement or retired that have disposable income, and they're traveling to play pickleball, whether it's to camps or to play tournaments. So it's huge. It's making a big difference in sports tourism.
Yeah,
definitely sounds like it's making a big difference. You had mentioned it earlier, and I think Joey might have some thoughts and questions as well, and also Lee and Sasha and even Shaquille. But we're also seeing some of the games bring in things to quicken the game or to add some special kind of pizzazz to it. I know in the All-Star game, they borrowed from the TBT tournament, and they added that whole notion of a time limit and all in that kind of way. So they added the rule that was part of the TBT tournament that you had to score a win by a certain amount of points, and you had a certain amount of time to do it within, and all along those lines. So that was a new rule that they incorporated into the All-Star game. They haven't incorporated into the full game and everything, but I just wanted your thoughts around some of these new rules, whether it's in basketball or baseball or some of the others, because as you said, there are folks that are wanting to quicken the game or make the game faster, even though a lot of times folks like the entire experience of being out there all day long, from the whole tailgating on up till the end of the game and all in that space. But I guess there are some folks that want the games to be a little bit quicker.
It's all about attention span and grabbing fans' attention. They have so many options right now for entertainment, so that if you can't grab it, you're going to lose it. And so this is where LIV, they're doing the team competition, which attracts more interest. They have the shotgun start. So some of those adjustments, which the PGA was very like, oh, this is tradition, now we'll have to adjust to. So everyone's going to have to adapt in order to survive.
No doubt about that. Jacoby, any thoughts? You were actually over there at the Durham Bulls Stadium doing a lot of work with them and also with the Hurricanes. So you're definitely in the sports lanes. So any thoughts about what Lisa is talking about and just about the conversation in general?
Mark, could you switch me over, please?
Yes.
I hate to bring up, because we talked a little bit about LIV. The interesting part that Saudi Arabia is pushing out a lot of, they just reached out to Mbappe and reached out to give him a 1-year deal at $1.1 billion. So I guess jumping back to the LIV conversation is,
yes,
would you consider what they're doing to be more sports washing than sports tourism?
Well, they're trying to make a name for themselves and be relevant in the world, right? So they're trying to bring a lot of attention to Saudi Arabia. They're for me, it's very similar to how China was developing. They use sports to, hold the Olympic Games in 2008, change people's perceptions, get on the scoreboard. It's very similar. They're building cities just like China has built cities. So I've had a chance to travel the world and spend time. I've been twice to Saudi Arabia within the last year. They are looking, like I did a research study for Saudi Arabia on why and why not people are playing sports, both women, both girls and boys, trying to encourage young people to play sports. I think it's not sustainable what they're doing, spending that much money to bring athletes over. Because who knows how long they're going to stay and what real impact will it have? What is their ultimate objective of doing that? I know they want to build Saudi Arabia's sports soccer team level up so they can be very competitive in the World Cup. They would like to host the World Cup. So, these are all things that come into play.
At the end of the day, though, Lisa, when you're younger, it's all about being good at sports. When you're older, it's all about the money. But one of the problems that I've seen is younger people, especially there in sports, make a lot of money real quickly, and then it all evaporates. In other words, their education in terms of financial planning is frankly pretty low. They buy the big house, the big car, the fast appreciating assets, and then all of a sudden it's all gone. What can you do in sports management to coach people into financial literacy? Because making a lot and then being busted the rest of your life probably isn't a good way to go. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, here's the problem. All agents know how to advise their athletes, and they do mention it. They advise them over and over again. I wouldn't spend that. I would do this, but they don't want to push because all these athletes can write a letter, fire that agent overnight, and that's it. So if you push them too much when they're having other people say, "Oh, go spend, do what you want," then they run the risk of being fired. So there are the players associations. All of them have financial literacy programs. We at GW did for 5 years, we ran an MBA program for current and former professional athletes, and we had 40 NFL players graduate. We're very proud of those people. They've done a great job, but you can lead a horse to water, right? So there's lots of programs out there to educate athletes, but not that many take advantage of it, unfortunately. And they have their own posse. They have too many.
They're surrounded by their advisor groups, and some of them are pretty poor. I mean, this is what I've seen. I go,
Lisa and Nick, not only they're poor, but sometimes they make some very bad decisions. We know that we've all been following what's going on with John Morant and some of his people that he are traveling with that are definitely letting him flash the guns and do other things out in public. And that has definitely cost him some endorsements, but I don't know that it's cost him enough endorsements or enough of a consequence and all in that space. But definitely that is something that is going on. And definitely I would love to hear your thoughts about how much leeway we give the athletes, and also your thoughts, because you mentioned it earlier, about the NILs.
The entourages are problems. I mean, they bring them sketchy deals without vetting them. And then because the athlete trusts too many people. All their life, they've been taken care of. You think college athletics, they've been told where to go, when to go, what to do. And then when they become pros, they seek that advice from people that's closest to them. Oftentimes they're friends that have no real business experience. And they're trying to make a fast buck. So it's really not a good situation. And then with NIL, some deals now, universities have started setting up better systems for these NIL deals. But at the beginning, some of these athletes were signing away their name, image, likeness for their entire life without even knowing it, and for hardly any money. So it's sad that nobody was there to catch these at the beginning, but it was like the Wild West. I mean, I was in sports at the beginning when we were still revising contracts. Now those contracts are pretty well established, but NIL was so new. Deals were being, signed without any real review.
Yeah, and there's some great case studies on this, like Evander Holyfield. He made $500 million. Today he's broke. Boris Becker, great tennis player. Steve probably knows him personally, since Steve was a top tennis player. Boris Becker in prison for tax fraud because he lied. For bankruptcy fraud because he lied on his bankruptcy application because he got involved in leveraged deals he didn't know anything about. Now here you got some great athletes, and they suck. They suck when it comes to financial management.
Can I just make the comment?
So I never manage athletes.
Can I just make the comment here, Nick?
They might. Yeah.
Right.
Mine in your neighborhood, they do the same thing. Hedge fund managers.
Right. So, but let me just, and Lisa, this is not directed at you, but let me just make sure that I've understood this correctly. So, if a business person gets bad advice, perfectly okay. If Martha Stewart's going to jail, no problems. But if an athlete goes to jail, this is terrible, we have to do something about it. Is that what I'm hearing so far?
I don't think that's what you're hearing.
I don't think that's what you're hearing. That's what you just made up.
And in relation to the NIL deal,
it's bad all the way around because the thing is,
we've seen this type of deal happen. We've seen this type of deal happen with, say, for example, Kesha, whose producers said, "We're the ones that produced you. We're the ones that put all the money into you. You were nothing before we came along." This is a common deal in the sports industry as well. Outside of, if we just move slightly away from US colleges, this is a very common deal for sports stars. You find some kid, 14, 15 years old, you think that kid's going to go on to greatness. You say to the parents of that child, listen, we're going to pay for your kid's college. We're going to pay for the tuition. We're going to pay for all this stuff, but we want a big share. We want you to sign over the likeness, etc. What's wrong with that sort of arrangement? That young person may not have had the opportunity without somebody who's prepared to put the money behind them first.
Well, in my industry, Shaquille, they have the best interest rule and they have fiduciary rules. Okay. And so the thing is, when I counsel people, I say, go look for a fiduciary. In a lot of cases, I'll send them
Nick,
to
if I make a
trust
deal,
company. I know you
Nick,
don't
if I
like
make a
trust
deal-
companies, but trust companies
if I
have
make
to
a deal with an
abide by
athlete,
a fiduciary rule.
So
Fiduciary rules
I
are
gotta-
even
Nick,
explained.
if I make
to
a
sports
deal with an
teams.
athlete, as I have done, if I make a deal with an athlete, as I have done for a tennis player who I'm not going to name,
You're not
if
a
I make a
fiduciary.
deal with that tennis player gets their own lawyers. That tennis player gets their own financial advisors. And if they agree that this tennis player who's currently not earning anything is going to benefit from my financial backing, I'm entitled, I believe, to the profits that we agreed on because I might have backed other athletes that I don't get anything out of. How many college athletes are backed by colleges that are not profitable versus the ones that are?
Well, Shaq, I think one thing that you're doing is you're taking your personal experience and you're a good person. And I think you're not going to take advantage of many of these kids who are young and not listen. They don't have that financial understanding. They don't have that financial literacy. They're being tossed millions and billions of dollars at a particular time, and their parents are coming from impoverished areas. So, of course, when a lot of these people walk in saying they have a good deal, just like with John Morant still having his friends around, we talked about making bad decisions still, and they don't have that advantage that I think that you're thinking that some in the business world may have already. ESPN did a great piece about this, and actually Lisa brought it up as well here, which is what I wanted to point out, because actually Lisa and Nick brought it up, is ESPN talks about, or ESPN's 30 for 30 talked about how roughly about 70% of the professional sports athletes are flat broke after they leave out of their sport, because the average lifespan or the average career span, for example, of an NFL player is roughly about 3 years, 3 to 3.5 years.
Right.
You don't get on the actual insurance benefits and insurance plans until you reach a particular year, career year, which I think is that third year.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, so if your career, because to make that average span, so if you look at Tom Brady, who was there for 30 years, it felt like, you have to have somebody who was there for maybe about a week. And then on top of that, you have so many people that bring that average down. So the vast majority of players don't even get on that insurance plan. And then take baseball, which I'm part of. Hold on, let me finish out real quick. I'll let you jump in. In baseball, for example, that I'm actually a part of and knowing many of these players, Dirk Hayhurst wrote a brilliant article for Deadspin years back. He played for the Durham Bulls. The majority of baseball players that you don't even realize don't play professional. They're sitting on a very, very cheap contract. There's a 40-man roster. Those individuals get that big. I think the bare minimum now is either 300,000 or 700,000. I can't remember, but they don't make it on that bare minimum. The vast majority of players are making minimum wage. If you take the amount of hours they put in, they're making less than minimum wage. So a lot of these players aren't signing all these things because they're making less than minimum wage and don't get any money off of that. But then they get hooked up with people who say, just like you're saying, I can get you all this money, but they don't. And they sign a bad deal, and then they lose all of their stuff and they're flat broke when they leave baseball. So it's a tough thing to say, yes, it's a bad deal and oh no. But what ends up a lot of times is this area, this sports area, same thing with the acting field, people get taken advantage of because they don't have that business sense. So it is
Hey, Toby, just along those lines, I want to direct this to. Hold on a second. I want to direct this to Lisa.
I want to thank Lisa for being on the show. I have to run, but it's been wonderful having you on, and we look forward to continue our discussion. Does the Women's World Cup play this evening, 9:00?
9:00 Eastern time. Everybody
US
show up. We need the ratings.
States. Okay, women play. Okay, well, we wish them all the best, and looking forward to the Olympics, which will be here before we know it in
1 year from today.
1 year from today.
Yeah,
And we'll continue our discussion next week. I'll be out for the next 2 days, but we'll be talking about presidential race, Ukraine, counteroffensive, and of course, getting an update from Sasha Starr on Ukraine, Russia. But thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, but we're going to continue the discussion while you're bouncing and everything. Lisa, one thing I was going to ask, and Jacoby kind of alluded to it, is I think a lot of athletes, and particularly those on the college level, forget how hard it is to break into the industry. It is a very minimal amount of the people that are competing that actually make it to the pro level. And I know a lot of folks are not realizing how minuscule the percentage is of those that make it, that have the aspirations of making it, and all along those lines. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, because we got hundreds and thousands, tens of thousands of people that are competing in the high school level, the college level. I know there are a number of states like Florida and Texas, and I would even argue parts of North Carolina, that are big on their high school and definitely on their college level and everything, but it's not that many of them that actually make it and make this kind of money that we're talking about. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. And since you are teaching that, and is that something that y'all let the folks know, even there at George Washington, that yeah, you may be a superstar even in your high school level, but you're not going to always make it to the professional level?
Right. It's less than 1%. And what I'm sharing a lot of information about now is so many of these college athletes are complaining, oh, we're not getting money. And what they're doing is they're pushing almost like a professional program. And I can guarantee you they're going to be making minor league pay if they go that professional route, which is, $25,000 to $50,000. Right now, they get room and board, the basketball and football players. The majority of them get room and board, a tuition at GW that's $80,000 a year, or $75,000 a year. They get their travel. And on top of that, they get an allowance. Some of them are up to $8,000 a semester that they get a cost of living allowance on top of their room and board. Most people don't understand this cost of living allowance, and schools can make it up whatever they think cost of living is. And I can guarantee you some of them, like in Nebraska, have a high cost of living, which I don't understand. But they pay these players just a stipend. And, their deal right now is pretty good. And I just worry that if it does become more professional, what they're really going to get, because will colleges still pay for tuition? If, I see in the future that colleges license out their name. So it could be the George Washington University basketball team, but a professional entity runs that team. And it's just the GW name. That happens down in South America. So in Brazil, there's the XYZ University basketball team. And it's completely separate from the university other than the name.
Is there any way to begin regulation around that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, say that.
I was just because I'm full agreement with what you're talking about in terms of the way that the NIL is now. Is there any regulations that you can see that could help, stem that tide?
NCAA right now is hands off. They've been sued right and left. They're like, forget it. If you guys want it open, whatever it really is the Wild West right now. Anybody's doing everything. They say that you're not supposed to use NIL for recruiting. We all know they're using it for recruiting. So, but is NCAA going to press it? They're in a tough situation. And so, we think, what is this NCAA? It is members. It's the athletic, there's representatives from all these universities that make these votes and decide on things. So it's not just, a couple people in Indianapolis making decisions. We have to understand that it's the universities making these decisions for them. So I don't know. They're just hands off right now. And because
there are some other sports that are out there that aren't as hands off as actually one of them I'm going to mention, and I hope he'll join back the conversation. Shaquille has actually been involved in it and all in that space, but there are sports that are like definitely horse racing that we've seen some things that have gone on. There's definitely greyhound racing and a number of other things in that space, and sometimes those sports can sometimes be what seems to be overly regulated. But I was just wondering your thoughts about that, because there are some sports that seem to be overly regulated, partially because of some of the things that have happened and partially because of rules and things that we have in place here in the United States and around the world. And like I said, it's not hidden knowledge. He's definitely brought up on some past shows. Shaquille has been involved in greyhound racing and all in that space. But I was just wondering your thoughts around some of these sports that might be more heavily regulated. And then, like I said, I'm hoping Shaquille will jump on and he might have some thoughts about that as well.
Well, I mean, boxing's heavily regulated, but of course that's health and safety, right? And so primarily for health and safety reasons. I mean, I was really surprised, and I still haven't figured out why there were 12 horses that died at Kentucky Derby. I mean, is it drugs? What is it? I can't imagine 12 horses dying around the Kentucky Derby for what reason. I'm not sure how regulated that is. Anyway, regulations are put in place for a reason, to protect the integrity of the game, protect the safety of the game, of the athletes. I'm for regulation where it's necessary. And in, today's world, nobody likes to be regulated.
Yeah. Lee, I don't know if you had any thoughts, or Sasha, but the other thing I was going to ask you really quickly is that we mentioned pickleball, but is there another sport that you see on the horizon that may be gaining in popularity? We know soccer has definitely got a foothold around the world and trying to get a foothold in the United States, even though I don't know that it's ever going to surpass basketball and football and baseball and some of our more popular sports. But is there something that you see on the horizon that folks need to be paying attention to that could be the sport of the future?
Well, in the United States, we're all about pickleball, but I can tell you the rest of the world is all about paddle. It's like a racquetball. It has a back wall. And you can bounce the ball off the back wall. So there's more infrastructure involved. So I don't think it's really going to take off here in the United States because pickleball is very, it's taken a foothold now. But the rest of the world, Middle East, Europe, paddle is huge. And so it's PADD.
Is that similar to racquetball in a way?
But it doesn't have all force. It doesn't have the sides on the, it doesn't have walls on the side. So it's just the front and back. And so it's a combination of like pickleball, racquetball, some say some squash. That's something to look at. Obviously, flag football is trying to get into the Olympic Games, and it kind of has an in. We also have to think about who Casey Wasserman is the head of the U.S. Olympic, the LA Olympic Committee. And he's also very involved with Wasserman, close relationships with the NFL. So flag football is making a big push to be in the Olympic Games. I don't see pickleball being able to get in. It's not a global enough sport at this time. As I said, paddle is bigger overseas. So, all these things come into play.
Lisa, were you surprised that breakdancing made it as a sport in the Olympics? Because I'm going to be perfectly honest, I was a little bit surprised, and I'm actually a fan of breakdancing, and I've definitely seen street breakdancing and knows that it is very intense and can definitely be very competitive and definitely can be very physically oriented and all. In that space, there are some other things that can be competitive that aren't as physical, because I got friends that are in the spoken word lane, and I don't ever see spoken word being in the Olympics. But I was just wondering whether you were surprised at breakdancing making it into the Olympics.
I wouldn't say I was that surprised, because the IOC is making a big push to attract younger audience. Right now, the ratings are very skewed older and female. So what are they doing to bring in the younger audience? They're going, they added skateboarding, they added break dancing, rock climbing. So all of these are meant to attract the younger audience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The younger audience, because this is where I was shocked that when they did not add esports into the Olympics, because I know Rick Fox had that big push that he was I think he's still trying to make it happen.
I teach the business of esports, and I've closely followed the Olympics, and a couple things. The biggest hurdle right now is that nobody else owns basketball or owns, swimming. There's no private corporation that owns this. For esports, there's a private company that owns the IP rights for those games. So the IOC does not want to be controlled by a corporation. And which corporation are you going to work with to put these games in? So that's one of the biggest obstacles. The other one is there's a lot of violence. The most popular games, there is violence in those. And the IOC is meant to be about peace and friendship and all of that. So that's another obstacle. The final one is, obviously, is it physical? Now, I can say archery and shooting is about as physical as esports, because I've been to esports competitions. I see how they have to stretch and get ready to endure a major competition. So I don't buy that part of it. It's just really, it's a complex field, a complex industry, esports.
Well, Jacoby oftentimes talks about the amount of money that is made in esports because it surpasses and actually vastly surpasses most of the traditional sports and all along those lines. So as one that has taught that field, what is some of the number one lessons that you have taught your students? Because I know that oftentimes Jacoby, who is in this field, will mention how, Jacoby, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I want to say you say that it is more than all three and maybe even all four combined together in that space, and it is vastly more and all in that kind of way, if I remember the quote, and all along that kind of way.
You have to understand that there's a difference between esports and gaming. So gaming is bigger than sports and entertainment together, but that's just people going online and playing for recreation. And it's the same thing you could say for youth soccer or youth basketball. It's bigger than the competitive side of things. So that's where all the money is being made. And it's being made by the publishers, the people who produce the IP, because people are spending money for in-game, they can make their character look differently. They can buy tools to make them play better. So anybody who's playing is spending money in game, and that money goes to the publishers. And so you really have to understand the ecosystem of esports to understand who's making money, who's playing it, and why it's such a big industry.
Yeah. Lee, any thoughts about the conversation? Same for you, Sasha, as well. We're wrapping up toward the end, but I've thoroughly enjoyed learning a lot from Lisa and everything. But I don't know if either one of you.
I just got a quick question. First, welcome to the podcast. It's just a question on your perception. You talked about regulation being there for the health of the athletes primarily. Jennifer Stay spoke widely about that in her experiences. Since the COVID shot, are these injuries being more broadcast now, or just being made aware of them? Are they been happening all along throughout your career? LeBron James' son yesterday had a cardiac arrest. Is this common, or there's an uptick?
No, I mean, we are seeing, we're hearing about them more often. It's just like, how many times did we hear about sexual harassment or abuse in sports before? But trust me, it had been happening all along, and even more so. So I think it's just everybody's, hearing about it more aware of it. And the stars are speaking out about their injuries. So before, people would want to hide those injuries because they wanted to keep playing and not be, isolated or not be picked up. But I think more and more people are speaking about their injuries now.
As they should.
Yeah, speaking about those injuries, and I want to hear if Sasha's got a question as well. We're in the middle of this heat wave around the United States, and I think that there have always been kind of concerns about that, even in training. I can't tell you how many times in North Carolina, in definitely the hotter areas like Texas and Arizona and California, you would hear about the athletes that were passing out because of heat stroke and things along those lines. So I was wondering if that's something that you are seeing an uptick in because of the nature of the climate.
Yeah, I mean, it's something, so many events have been canceled because hopefully now most people working in this space have gone through proper education about, and most sports organizations have a cutoff about when they can and cannot hold competitions. You see in the World Cup that they've had, or actually here, it was an MLS All-Star game, they added extra water breaks, right? So they stopped competition to add the water breaks. That's something that's new. In the past, do you think soccer matches would be stopped? No, but because of more regulation and health and wellness considerations, they are adding these restrictions on when marathons can be run. It has to be a certain temperature and humidity. Certain baseball games have to be cut short. So there are regulations in place now.
Yeah.
Very good question.
Go ahead, Serge.
Lisa, I would like to ask you that if you were watching Wimbledon, and there were, of course, a few Russian and Belarusian athletes performing, and there was a great uneasiness about shaking hands after the match. In most cases, Ukrainians refused to shake hands with Russian players or Belarusian. How Olympics are going to regulate this issue? What do you think?
I'm telling you, this is really tearing apart the Olympic movement right now. Obviously, I'll share my experience. So if it was the first time that Russian Olympic Committee has run into trouble with following the rules or being a good citizen, then maybe I could give it a pass. But considering their history with doping, considering how they have said that they're going to be non-identified at games, and then I see flags on their uniforms and I ask, and they're like, oh, well, when they went through check, they didn't have the flags. But when I was there at the Olympic Games, I saw flags on people's uniforms. So they don't follow rules. They have dismissed the rules of the Olympic Games. And I think, and then it's not just a little tit and tat. This is a full-on invasion of a country. And so these are egregious acts that need to be stopped. That's my own personal, and there's history. How many South African athletes did not get to compete in Olympic Games, did not get to compete in any types of sports at all? So it's not the first time that we've had, a split where certain athletes cannot compete because of what the government is doing in that country. And, that's where I'm coming from. Whether having no South African athletes compete, did that really stop apartheid? I think it helped. I can't say it's 100% what did it, but it raised a lot of.
Yeah, there have been countries or athletes who've refused to compete against an Israeli contestant or refused afterwards to shake hands. Any comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's there. I think I disagree with that because right now Indonesia backed out of holding the World Beach Games and also the ANOC, it's Association of National Olympic Committees that we actually held here in Washington, D.C. It's a big meeting of all the National Olympic Committees. And Indonesia withdrew because they don't recognize Israel. And the IOC said you need to invite or have representatives from Israel attend. And so instead of fighting it, they just withdrew. It's a tough situation, but if and some people say that Israel is invading Palestine, which I get. But that, I don't know. I'm not a political science major.
I got you. But Lisa, along those same lines, I was just wondering from a sports line, and it's actually two questions, then we'll wrap up and we can go a little bit over. But what are your thoughts about those folks that are concerned about the rules and regulations of other societies? Because I do know that there are folks that are wanting to protest against certain countries because of their thoughts or their rules against, like, say, the LGBTQIA community? And is that something that should be in the sports lanes, or should sports stay out of the political lanes? Because I do know that there are folks that are wanting to protest because they are seeing violations from certain countries that they might be competing against.
If they want to speak up about those topics, there's plenty of opportunities to do it on their own social media campaigns. They don't need to do it on the field of play. So I think, for me, I'd like to see, and I train athletes on this topic about how to use their voice and use their brand for good. And there's many ways to do that beyond right there on the playing field.
Yeah. The last question I got is actually one we've talked about here on this show. And if you want to avoid the question, I can understand that. But there have been conversations around the trans community and whether they should have their own athletics or not have their own athletics. But I'm just wondering if that's something that you have been having conversations about with your students, and what is the general feeling? Because there are some folks that are feeling that they need to have a third category, men's sports, women's sports, and sports for the others.
I mean, if there's enough athletes to put in a lane for, like in swimming, I agree with the proposals out there that there's a separate event for individuals that identify differently than male or female. So I just, there's evidence out there that shows even if they've taken the hormones, it's body
It's not fair to women. It's not fair to women.
Yes.
Well, what about, just to, I guess, stay on that. Why is it that we only think that it's unfair to women, but what about the trans men who play men's sports? We never think about that.
I understand what you mean. Trans men?
Yes, there are trans men who compete in men's sports, but we never talk about the trans men.
These are biological women who transition to men?
Yes.
I'm not aware of any.
There are plenty of them. There's actually one who won actually in boxing. I think it was either last year or year before last. And then, so there are trans women who compete in men's sport, or trans men who compete in women's sports. But we always consider only one side of the equation.
My understanding is most sports are not men's sports. NFL, NBA, they're all open sports. Just women can't compete.
Again, as I pointed out, there was a trans man who won a boxing match. Right. There are trans men who compete in men's sports. And I think, Lisa, right now, I think you had pointed out perfectly that if there is enough athletes, but we aren't even at a point where there's even enough athletes, because in track and field, for example, which a lot of the angst, track and field and swimming are a lot of the angst and anger come from. There aren't even enough trans women in swimming and trans women in track. So that's where I think they can, like, there are a ton of trans men out there, just as don't want to say a ton. There's a percentage there and a percentage there. But again, we always focus just on it's unfair to women, but we never think about the trans men.
Well, the body types, it's not as challenging. I mean, yes, you may have, from what I have read and understand, the women competing in men is less of a threat to the men than a man competing or transgendered to a woman. There's less of a threat to disruption of competition, fair competition.
No, it might be less of a threat, but I've got to teach you about something, Lisa, and I've got to ask you a quick question and we'll wrap up totally and everything. But it might be less of a threat, but I'm also thinking to Toby's point, because I think that one of those cases was actually less than a year ago and everything. And I do sometimes wonder about the ego side of it, because if you are a man boxer or a man wrestler in this heavily male-dominated sport, and then you find out that it was actually a former woman that is now a man that beats you and everything, there are a lot of men that will have some serious ego problems with that. I'm just being very honest about it if they find that out, because there's some men that's going to do some serious damage to their ego and all along those lines. So from an ego
Well,
standpoint,
well, actually, also to tag on to that as well. Well, that's the fun part. That's the happy one. So I guess we'll stay there rather than because the other argument with in terms of the whole trans women situation. Now you're asking for women to prove that they're women. I think that becomes another issue.
yeah, that's a whole nother issue and everything. Coming back to the social media, I do sometimes wonder if some of the track athletes, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this as a sports management person, if they're not known more for their brand than for their skills. I am a fan, and I've become a fan over the last couple of years of both Shakira and her competitors and all along those lines. But sometimes when we hear about them, it's what they are doing in their social media lanes, whether it's what they're doing when they're getting on a plane or what they're doing when they're tweeting about each other or putting Facebook posts about each other. So I just wanted your thoughts about that, because there are some amazing track athletes on both the women and the man side, but I think we know more about them because of their social media presence than we do about their actual competitions. But I just wondered your thoughts around that.
Well, it's because they have to. We barely show any athletics here in the United States. We had the World Championship with the best of the best in Oregon, and it barely got any news coverage. I think Washington Post didn't even do a story. So it was very disheartening because track and field is a major Olympic sport, great athletes, amazing athletes. And so they have to build up their brand. And I think they've done a great job, as you said. And then that attracts people to watch the sport. So they are brand ambassadors for their sport as well as themselves.
Yeah,
watch Inter Miami with Lionel Messi.
Oh, yeah.
You see what's happened there? It's
Oh,
a
yeah.
huge star. And if US will attract more European stars to their league will flourish, and the sport will be amazing to watch. I started recently to watch Inter Miami. Like before, for me, it was not an event when you are watching English Premier League or German or other leagues. So that was a no. But now I discovered that it's quite interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it was a good move, and Apple bought into it because Apple has the broadcast rights now. So they are giving Messi a part of every Apple subscription for MLS as a way to supplement him and to encourage him to come to the United States. But it's a win-win, right? Apple's hoping to get more viewership and more MLS subscriptions, and it's a good thing for Messi. He didn't want to go to Saudi Arabia.
Great
definitely.
news.
What are your thoughts about the WNBA? And after that, I'll definitely hit our button to go in and out. And if you can tell folks how they can reach you if they have other questions that we haven't got to. But the WNBA is in the middle of their season. And I personally think that from a standpoint of the tradition of the basketball game, that they play a more pure version of basketball than the NBA, because I think the NBA gets a little bit too caught up in the showmanship aspect of the game. And I think that they are more fundamentally connected to the Naismith version of basketball, or the origins of basketball. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about the WNBA.
In my teaching, I say they're two different products, and you have to market them differently. So, people who like that traditional basketball play will love the WNBA. And I think instead of just trying to say it's the same sport, men and women, I think it would be a better way to market it, just as you said.
Yeah, definitely agree with you on that and everything. You have been a fascinating guest. If there are others that want to reach you, how can they reach you? And I hope that you will make a return trip. I was glad that I was able to find you through some of those podcasting services. And I hope that you've enjoyed the conversation, and we'll come back when you are able to share some of your thoughts around sports and all along those lines. We've been actually trying to get a sports show. So I might have to talk to you about getting some of your students or some others on the network, and if we can't create a sports show, because that is something we are sorely lacking at the moment. We do have some gaming shows, but we don't have any that focus regularly on sports and all along those lines. But definitely any thoughts that you have and any ways that folks can reach you. And like I said, I'll definitely reach out to you about maybe getting with you and some Duke players and some other folks and creating some sort of sports conversation.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. People can reach me at Delpy, DELPY @gwu.edu. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm on all the social media outlets. So we'd love to carry on the conversation. And it's perfect timing, Mark, for us to start a podcast, as I know the Sports Business Association at GW is looking to do that. So we can work together.
Sounds like a good plan to me and everything. We're going to get out of here. And I know that I've got to be reporting at around 12:50 for the 1 o'clock show. So yes, I did get your message, Sasha, and all along those lines. We'll be talking about modern investments. And who knows, maybe Sasha and his gang might be investing in some sports businesses as well. But they can tell you that, whether that is something they want to get into or not, because I know that those can be dangerous investments as well.
Actually, this new person, why we want to adjust our programs at 10 to 1, he is a fantastic musician, and he is going to talk about, among other things, investing in musical instruments and how this investment paid 20,000% in a matter of a few years and more. So I'm fascinated myself. I'm also a musician too, and I would like to hear what he has to say.
Sounds like it'll be fascinating. And by the way, Lisa, Sasha is also a master chess player. So if you're ever looking on Pod TV on Saturday at 3, you can catch him, as well as Jim Eade, Ken Reagan, the new gentleman whose name is slipping me at the moment, but he is a grandmaster as well. And they oftentimes talk about chess. We'll actually be recording that on Friday, but it actually airs on a Saturday. So I don't know if you ever get into the chess game or if you're more of a physical competition person, because I know that some people like both. I actually enjoy both, even though I need to, as I told the rec people when they were doing their day retreat, I need to get to the gym. So the gym and me are not been friends, so I need to see the gym sooner versus later.
Mark, and you can mention also Ukrainian shows.
Yes.
Yesterday, a very good program, and another one will be on Friday.
Yes, and we're hoping to have Ivan, who comes from Kyiv, so he'll be sharing personal experiences right there from the battle line. And he oftentimes will show some videos that are coming from that area as well that definitely give you an idea of what is going on. So those are Tuesday and Friday at 11 o'clock. We've been having them for almost close to 2 years now, because that war is almost getting ready to come up on the 2-year mark. And I, for one, am hoping that we don't do that one for 3 or 4 years, because I'm hoping that that war comes to an end, but with Ukrainian freedom and all along those lines. So hopefully we'll be having a end to that at some point or another, but it doesn't look like there's an end in sight, unfortunately. But maybe we'll have, as Sasha likes to say at the end of his show, some good news will be coming in the near future. So hopefully that will be the case and all along those lines. But right now we're going to get out of here. I'm glad to have all of y'all join this conversation. And like I said, I hope that Lisa will be coming back in the near future as well. And I hope she enjoyed the conversation as much as I enjoyed having it with her.
Thank you, Lisa. It was a great show.
It was a pleasure meeting you. God bless.
Thank you. See you.
Great to meet you.